January 1883, Dustmere Valley. The kind of cold that don't just sting your skin, but sinks in slow and deep through teeth, bones, breath. Everything's quieter when it's that cold. Even the birds had stopped calling. I hadn't seen another soul in near 8 days, and truth be told, I was just fine with it. I kept to myself, lived in a square-cut cabin I'd built with my own 2 hands after leaving the cattle trails for good. I never meant to vanish. It just sort of happened when everything else in me got too quiet to carry around other folks. I was 33 then, but I'd felt older for years. Not in the body, not always, but in the way you stop expecting the world to hand you anything but stillness. My face, or so I'd been told, looked like a man who stopped waiting for something better to show up. And I reckon that was true. I didn't frown on purpose, it just settled in like weather does, without asking. My eyes, well, they always stayed fixed a little too long on fire or dirt or trees. Folks in Ash Grove said I was cold. Not cruel, just unreachable. Like maybe I'd left some part of myself behind a long ways back and didn't care to go retrieve it. Truth is, they weren't wrong. I had a wife once, a daughter too. My little girl caught fever our second winter here. There weren't a doctor, close enough nor time enough to fix what the snow had already taken. She slipped from us like breath in the dark. My wife left in the spring after. Said there was too much silence in the walls and me. Said it felt like drowning. I didn't argue, I just watched her go. I buried my girl under the pines at the edge of the tree line, where the sun breaks through earlier than anywhere else come morning. It's the warmest piece of earth on my land, so I gave it to her. After that, I just worked, trapped, chopped, ate what I caught, burned what I split. I kept everything in order because it was the only thing I had left that didn't feel like falling apart. I liked it quiet. At least that's what I told myself. The night it happened, I'd just finished skinning 2 rabbits. Stove was on low, water boiling. I was short a half sack of flour and maybe 3 jars of beans. I made a list in my head like I always did. Run the trap line, get to town by Wednesday, cut more pine before the ice thickens again. I just settled into the thought of sleeping when I heard it. 3 knocks, not loud, not rushed, just spaced out, almost polite. I froze. My hand was still on the pot handle. I stared at the door. Nobody came up here. Not at night, not without reason. Second knock came, same rhythm but lighter. My gut tightened. I glanced at the rifle leaned against the wall. Didn't reach for it. I stepped slow, unlatched the door and pulled it open with my left hand. The cold hit first, like walking into a wall of ice. Then I saw her. A woman, late 20s maybe, soaked to the bone, skirt fraying at the hem, shawl half frozen to her shoulders, eyes wide but tired. Her lips were cracked, hands shaking, and in her arms, wrapped in a blanket so patched it barely held together, was a little girl, small, maybe 4. Head lolled against her mother's collarbone, breath fogging slow and light. The woman looked up at me. No tears, no drama, just need. "I'll warm your bed if you let us in," she said, voice low, rough like it had scraped against every mile they'd walked. "My child needs a father." I didn't answer right away, just stared at her. The line wasn't romantic, wasn't desperate either. It was practiced, last card in a bad hand, one she hated playing, but would if it meant that girl got to see morning. I looked down at the child. No crying, just stillness. That's what got me. Kids cry when they hurt. She didn't. She was too far past hurt. I stepped back, slow, opened the door wide. She didn't say thank you, didn't need to. She stepped inside, knees nearly giving under her, but she stayed upright, moved straight to the stove, like she already knew the fight was still on. She laid the girl down on a folded wool blanket and began peeling the frozen one off her like skin from bark. I grabbed 2 more off the shelf, 1 for each of them, and crouched by the fire, stoking it higher. She didn't ask my name, didn't care. Her focus never left that child. That told me everything I needed to know. I handed her a cup of water. She took it without a word. Her hands were torn raw in places where the cold had split the skin. "Name," I said finally. "Miriam Doyle." She nodded toward the girl. "Annie, 4 years. Fever broke 2 days back, I think. We came from Coyote Ridge. Been walking 3 days." I said nothing. Just listen. "My husband died in a brawl. Left debt. Folks stopped hiring. Men wanted what I wouldn't give. Church told me to pray harder, so I left." I remembered the sound of my daughter breathing like that. Shallow, soft. I remembered it not lasting. I went to the shelf, ladled stew into a tin bowl, set it by her without a word, then did the same for Annie. The woman, Miriam, ate like she was afraid of being watched. When she finished, she said, "I'll work for what we eat." "I don't want charity." "I don't give it," I replied. And I meant that. I wasn't giving, none, I was choosing. That night, I lay awake on my cot near the door, rifle nearby, eyes on the girl. The fire cracked. Miriam didn't stir much. The room was still. But for the first time in a long while, I didn't lie there thinking about what I'd lost. I thought about what I'd let in. And I wondered what that meant come morning. If this story meant something to you, like the video, leave a comment, tell me where you're watching from, and follow the channel for more true-hearted stories from the quiet corners of the West. We've only just begun. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. Just laid there, boots off, rifle leaned against the wall behind me, eyes on the ceiling beam. Same. One I hung lanterns from during my daughter's last fever. The room was warmer than usual. The fire fed steady, the smell of boiled rabbit still hanging faint in the air. But my body didn't rest. I kept listening, first to the fire, then to the slow, quiet breath of that little girl bundled near the stove, then to the occasional creak of the cot where her mother lay, unmoving, but not asleep either. I knew that kind of stillness. It's not rest. It's waiting. The kind that comes after too many nights where nothing feels safe, not even sleep. Miriam hadn't said another word after she finished her stew. She'd taken the cot without fuss, wrapped herself in the wool, and curled her body toward the girl. Even in sleep, if it was sleep, her hand never left Annie's back, just rested there, a little too tense, like even in the warmth she still half expected someone to pull her child away. Annie hadn't said anything at all. Her breathing had steadied, but it was still shallow. Her cheeks had more color than when she came in, but only just. I'd seen fever take more life than bullets ever had. Children, especially. They don't fight like grown men do. They just fade. And I wasn't ready to see that again. Not here. Not after everything I'd buried under the snow line. I stayed on my side of the room. Didn't try to ask more, didn't poke at where they came from or who else might be looking. I figured if it mattered, I'd find out. And if it didn't, they'd still be here come morning. I stared at the fire a long time. It was different with more bodies in the room. The air moved different. Sound traveled softer. I realized something else too. It had been years since I'd heard a child's breath in that cabin. Years since anyone other than me had stepped across that threshold after sundown. And I didn't hate it. That's what unsettled me most. I didn't hate it. I kept my thoughts to myself, like always. But I could feel them stirring, scratching under the ribs, like something was starting to thaw alongside the valley. By morning, the fire had burned low, but not out. Breath came visible again. The windows glazed in a film of frost so fine it caught the early light like lace. Snow outside hadn't let up, but it had gone softer, no longer falling in wild sheets, just drifting steady. I rose without a word, boots back on, jacket slung over my shoulders. Stirred the coals, added kindling, watched the fire catch again. Then I turned to look at them. Annie was still curled beneath the blankets. Only the top of her hair showed, tangled and damp. She hadn't moved much, but her breath was deeper. A better sign than anything. Miriam, though, she'd shifted sometime during the night, was lying on her side now, one arm slung protectively over the child, the other under her cheek. Her face had changed in sleep, softer. Not young exactly, but less worn. And the way she curled her fingers against the cot told me something she wouldn't have said out loud. She didn't think she'd get to stay. I didn't wake them, just moved slow, brought in water from the snow barrel, checked the rifle, lit the second lantern. I set a pot of oats to cook, more for her than me. I could go days without much. She couldn't. Neither could that girl. The scent of oats thickened, and eventually I heard Miriam stir. First breath sharp, the kind you take when you don't know where you are yet. Then her eyes opened. She looked at the girl first, then around the room, like she was surprised nothing had changed, like maybe she half expected the floor to vanish or the roof to give way. I didn't mean to sleep that long, she said, sitting up, voice still raspy. You needed it, I answered. Not soft, just true. She sat up straighter, eyes on the window. Still snowed in? Mostly. Barn paths clear. Road to town's another matter. She didn't say anything else right then, just nodded and tucked the blanket around Annie tighter. I set a bowl on the table and nodded toward it. You can eat? She looked at me a little surprised. I can cook, she said fast. We're clean. If you need something done, I already did it. I said nothing, just watched her as she took the bowl and ate, slower this time. Less like survival, more like habit returning. After a while, Annie stirred, a small groan, the kind a sick child makes when something in her shifts. Miriam was beside her in an instant. Hey there, she whispered. You're warm. We're safe. She didn't sound like a woman who believed it fully yet, but she was trying. And that counted. I watched from my corner, didn't offer advice, didn't move closer, but I felt it, deep and sure. That girl was going to live. And Miriam, she wasn't just passing through, not anymore. Something started shifting after that second morning. Nothing loud, nothing said. Just different. Like the cold didn't settle quite as deep anymore. Like the silence inside the cabin wasn't just mine to carry. It was subtle at first, the way Miriam started warming the water without asking, or how she'd fold the blankets at dawn and straighten the cot before I'd even rolled up mine. She wasn't trying to make herself small anymore, not entirely, still cautious, sure, still quiet in the way folks get when life's been loud and cruel too long. But she moved like someone who had decided to stay, at least for now. Annie still hadn't said another word since that whisper of Ma, but she'd begun watching more. Her eyes followed me sometimes, not with fear, just curiosity, maybe trying to figure out who I was, what I'd do next. That child had seen too much, I could tell. But the fever was breaking. Her breathing was stronger. She was sitting up longer. She wasn't healing fast, but she was healing. Miriam worked like someone who didn't expect thanks. She'd clean the basin after I used it, stack the firewood neater than I ever did, boil snow in the mornings, and sweep dust into the cracks between the boards. She didn't wait for permission, and I didn't stop her. Truth be told, I didn't want to. There was comfort in watching someone tend to a space like it might still be worth something. She wasn't fixing the past. She was surviving forward. And I understood that kind of motion better than most. She never touched my tools, never asked what was mine. But one afternoon, I saw her mend a tear in one of my old flannel shirts without saying a word. Needle threaded with dark string from her own bundle. She handed it back, folded and warm from her lap, and I just nodded. Didn't know what to say, still don't. But I wore that shirt the next day. The days weren't marked by clocks out here, just by how fast the light pulled through the windows and how slow it left. I'd step out to check traps or haul in more wood. She'd stay with Annie, telling her soft stories I couldn't quite hear, wiping her face with a cloth, sometimes humming under her breath. Tuneless, broken, but steady. The kind of hum a person makes when they're holding pieces of themselves together with threadbare hope. One night, after I brought in 2 squirrels and a pheasant, I caught her looking at me different, not longing, not even grateful, just present, like she wasn't waiting to be turned out, like maybe she was finally starting to believe this place might hold. "You ever trap before?" I asked as I laid the catch on the table. She wiped her hands and stood, numbered just skinned what I had to, chickens. Squirrels once or twice. I nodded. That was enough. She had good hands, quiet ones, knew how to work without wasting motion. I didn't say so, but I noticed. That evening, I watched her feed Annie a thin broth made from bones and wild onions. The girl drank slow, no complaint, no resistance. Miriam smiled. Not wide, not soft, but real. A flicker of something like hope behind her eyes. She leaned down and kissed her daughter's forehead, then wrapped the blanket higher. I could tell her shoulders were still holding weight, but a little less now. Like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't bracing for another door to slam. Later that night, as I was unrolling my cot, she spoke. I meant what I said, back at the door. Her voice was low, almost to the stove more than me. But I'm not expecting anything from you. I just didn't know how else to ask for help. I looked at her for a long second, then I said, "You didn't have to offer." She nodded slow and lay down without another word. That night I kept the lamp burning a little longer. The fire crackled steady, warm, but quiet. I watched Annie sleep, curled between the wool blankets, her hand peeking out just enough to hold a corner of her mother's shawl. Miriam had turned to the wall, but I could see the way her breath moved slow and deep. No fear, just rest. And in the stillness, something happened I didn't expect. The silence didn't feel empty anymore. It didn't ache. It didn't echo. It just settled between us like a blanket we'd pulled up together. It belonged to all 3 of us now. By the 3rd morning, I stopped counting how many days they'd been here. Didn't seem like it mattered anymore. Miriam had claimed a rhythm in the cabin without ever asking permission. She kept her shawl folded on the same chair near the stove, laid out a cloth each morning to wash Annie's face, warmed the water before I could remind her. Never once looked like she believed she belonged, but everything she did said she was staying. I hadn't told her she could, but I hadn't told her to leave either. And out here, sometimes silence is consent. Annie still hadn't spoken since that one cracked whisper. "Ma!" but she was present now. Awake more, watched things with big dark eyes that didn't miss much. When I came in with firewood, her gaze followed my hands. When I skinned rabbits by the table, she sat up under the blankets and just watched. No questions, no fear either. Like she was trying to piece together who I was from the way I cut meat or how long I held a pause. Miriam caught me once, noticing her daughter stare. "She does that now," she said, drying her hands by the fire. "Follows people like they'll disappear if she blinks." I just nodded. Didn't need explaining. I knew what it was to watch the world like it owed you an answer. She kept working through the days like labor was the only language she trusted. Scrubbed shirts I hadn't touched in months. Found my old sewing kit in a drawer and stitched the split seam on my only winter coat. Didn't ask, just did it. When she handed it back, she didn't even look up, just said it was coming apart at the shoulder. "Thanks," I said, and meant it more than I let show. The girl started humming again, real soft. Barely there, more breath than sound. Miriam never acknowledged it. Maybe she didn't want to scare it off. Neither did I. The quiet in the room wasn't heavy anymore. It had shape, motion, like something alive. That evening, I watched Miriam ladle soup into a tin cup and bring it to Annie in small spoonfuls. She crouched low, her hand steady as she fed the girl one slow mouthful at a time. I sat across the room cleaning my rifle, but my eyes kept drifting their way. There was a warmth there that didn't ask for anything, just gave. "She's holding it down," Miriam said, more to herself than me. "Might be turning a corner." I said nothing, but I knew she was right. Fever's tricky. Sometimes it fakes you out. But this looked different. Annie's eyes didn't glass over. Her fingers gripped the blanket tight. She looked rooted. That was enough. After the girl was tucked in, Miriam paused near the stove, back half turned, her voice low. "You always alone out here?" she asked. I didn't move, just kept rolling out my bedding. "Been that way," I said. "On purpose?" I hesitated. Wasn't the plan, but it's what happened. She nodded like she understood, then lay down, pulling the blanket over her shoulder. That night, I kept the fire going longer than usual. Annie coughed once, sharp, then faded. Miriam sat up fast, hand on the girl's forehead. "She's warm, but it's not bad fever," she said toward the flame. "You need anything." "I'm all right, I've done this before." But she didn't lie down again. Stayed up beside her girl, wiping her brow with the cloth. I didn't sleep either, just watched the fire glow across the walls and listened to the wind pick up outside. It wasn't panic, not anymore. It was commitment. That's what it felt like. Quiet and steady. Sometime before dawn, Annie whispered something again. Miriam leaned close, her hand brushing the girl's cheek. "I'm right here, baby." That was all. But it filled the room. Next morning, Miriam was the first to stir. Fire had gone low again, but the room still held heat. I came in from checking the traps, hands red, coat stiff from snow. She was already slicing onions into the pot, her face calm, lips pressed tight. "I found a few cloths," she said. "I'll use them for Annie. She's sweating through the night now." "That's a good sign," I said. She blinked, surprised I'd said anything at all. We didn't speak after that, but later she asked, "You went to town last month?" I nodded. "You ever get a strong sewing needle?" I reached up on the shelf, pulled out a tin. "Last one." She smiled, just the corner of her mouth. "Then I'll make it last." That afternoon, she cleaned the pantry shelves, folded my shirts into neat stacks, swept the corners under the stove. Not because I asked, not for praise, just because she needed to make order somewhere. And that night when I caught her humming, low, steady, with her fingers wrapped around a mended sock, I didn't say a word, just let it be. That kind of peace. It's rare, and once it walks into your home, you don't question how it got there. If this story sits somewhere deep in your chest, if it reminds you of slow trust, of someone earning their space, not with words, but with presence. Like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and follow the channel to hear the rest of how a man, a woman, and a child turned a cabin into something like home. We're not done yet. Not even close. I knew trouble the second I heard the knock. It was too clean. 2 firm raps, measured, no panic, no desperation. Just someone who already felt they had the right to be there. I stood up slow, wiped my hands on a rag, glanced once toward Miriam, who froze halfway through stitching a button on one of my shirts. Annie was curled up on the cot, half dozing with her cloth doll in her arms. Miriam didn't speak, but her shoulders pulled tight like she'd just seen a shadow move too close to the fire. I opened the door just enough to see. She stood there with fur wrapped tight around her, boots polished, hair tucked neat, like she'd stepped out of a town parlor and not ridden through sleet. Her horse was tied behind her, breath steaming in the cold. Her face didn't show surprise, just that mild, polite expression people use when they think they're above asking for anything. "Eli," she said, "didn't think you were still alive out here." I didn't answer, didn't step aside. She glanced past me into the room, eyes landing on Miriam, then Annie, then back to me. I felt her judgment hit the air like a sharp wind. "You've got company." I stepped outside, pulling the door mostly shut behind me. The conversation wasn't long. It didn't need to be. She wasn't here for forgiveness or warmth. She was here to check if what she left behind had turned to rot or something worth regretting. I didn't offer her either. When she finally turned her horse back toward the road, I stood in the falling snow for a good while, just breathing in the cold. When I stepped back inside, the silence was back. Not the quiet we'd grown used to, but the old kind, the heavy kind. Miriam didn't look up. She was still by the fire, hands folded in her lap. "Someone from town," I said. "Doesn't matter." But it did. I could feel it in the way the warmth had slipped from the room. Not gone, just hiding. That night, Miriam lay stiff in her cot, arm curled tight around Annie like the world might come in again and take her. I stayed near the door longer than usual, watching the flames flicker low. The next morning she was quiet, but not distant, just waiting. I brewed the coffee stronger than I should have. She didn't complain, just sipped and stared into the mug like it could tell her what came next. "She from your past?" she asked. I nodded once. "We were close, years ago." She didn't look like she expected to see anyone else here. She didn't. She handed me a cup of hot water, steeped in crushed pine bark. Not real tea, but it helped. I took it from her without meeting her eyes. "She know your wife?" "No," I said. "Didn't know I had one." Her face changed a little at that. Not pity, just understanding. She'd been watching closely since that door closed the night before. Now she knew something about me I hadn't spoken out loud. "You think she'll come back?" "If she does," I said, "she won't knock next time." Miriam didn't push it, just nodded and went back to folding one of Annie's dresses, her fingers working slower than usual. That night, after Annie was asleep and the room had settled, she came to stand beside me near the stove. "You ever think about sending us away?" I didn't look at her right away. Just felt her presence there beside me, close but cautious. I did, that first night. Thought it'd be easier. And now? Now I don't think that anymore. She looked up at me then, her eyes searching my face. I let her, didn't flinch. I'm not here to take something from you, she said, voice quiet. I just need a place where my daughter can sleep without fear. You've got it. We stood like that, still and warm and wordless. Then I reached out, slow, and pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. My fingers brushed the line of her collarbone. Stayed there a second too long. She didn't move, just breathed in. When we went back inside, Annie stirred in her sleep but didn't wake. I rolled out my cot like always, but I knew something had shifted, nothing big, just real. Later, just as I was about to turn the lamp down, Miriam paused near the table. She reached out, brushed her fingers along my wrist, then leaned in and kissed me. Just once. Not rushed, not owed, not scared. Then she went to bed, and I stayed there at the table a while longer, staring into the fire, holding on to the feel of that kiss like it was the first true thing I'd been handed in years. The snow was thinning by then, enough to hear the creak again beneath the crusted ice. Enough that the trees didn't creak so heavy under the weight. Inside, the rhythm we'd built held steady. Fire tended before dawn. Annie's breath soft and even. Miriam moving through the cabin like she was learning how to live again, not just survive. I'd started leaving my boots by the door. I don't know why that struck me, but it did. Some part of me had begun believing no one would run. Then came the man. We saw the shadow first. Miriam was at the table, mending the hem of her skirt. I was oiling the rifle. A shape passed the window, slow, broad, deliberate. Not a hunter, not lost, just walking like he already knew who he'd find. The knock came sharp, louder than hers had been, louder than it needed to be. I stood, didn't hesitate, rifle in hand. When I opened the door, he stood tall in a worn coat buttoned to the neck, hat pulled low, jaw covered in travel stubble. He looked like he hadn't shaved in weeks, but still thought he owned the room before stepping into it. Eli Harland, he said, like he already knew the answer. I didn't reply, just held the door where I wanted it. Didn't expect you'd answer so quick. Heard you were still breathing out here. Thought I'd see for myself. I didn't say a word. Then his eyes shifted past me, just like the woman's had. He saw Miriam, standing behind the table now, her body blocking Annie without thinking. I felt the air change, not just between him and me, but in her too. Well, I'll be damned, he said. Miriam Doyle, figured you'd have crawled back to Coyote Ridge by now. She didn't flinch. Her voice came flat. What do you want, Will? He stepped forward, but not through the door. Just heard you ran off. Figured you might be looking for help, or a man. I'm not, he sniffed. Eyes flicked back to me. This one giving you shelter, or something else? That's when my voice came out, low, sharp. You came here to talk, say it, otherwise turn back down the path. He studied me a second longer. You always play guard dog for strays? I stepped forward, rifle still in hand. One more word like that, and you'll be bleeding in the snow. Silence stretched. Then he raised both hands. All right, didn't mean offense. But he did. Every inch of him did. I stepped outside and shut the door behind me. We spoke just long enough for me to make it clear. He wasn't welcome here, not today, not ever. When I came back inside, I set the rifle down without looking at her right away. Me? Who was he, I asked, though I already knew. Used to work with my husband. she said, voice low. After Cal died, he came around. Thought I owed him something. When I said no, he told folks I was sleeping my way through the county. She didn't raise her eyes. Annie was still on the cot, hugging her knees. Miriam didn't step closer to me. Just spoke it plain, like if she said it soft enough, it might not echo. I thought if I ran far enough, he'd stop looking. I watched her face for a long second. The way she held her jaw tight. The way she stood there, not asking me for protection, but bracing herself to survive without it, if that's how it had to be. He won't come back, I said. She blinked. How can you know that? Because I told him what happens if he does. She stared at me, something sharp and trembling in her eyes. You don't even know me. I know enough. The room stayed still for several heartbeats. Then she exhaled, slow, and moved to Annie's side. That night, after the fire burned low and the wind picked up again beyond the ridge, we didn't talk much. Annie was worn out, fell asleep early, breathing deep and warm. I sat near the stove, watching the flames. Miriam walked over, sat on the edge of the table, hands folded in her lap. I never meant to drag trouble to your door, she said. You didn't, I told her. It found you before. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees. I don't know how to repay any of this. I've never had a man protect me without expecting something back. I'm not those men. Her eyes stayed on the floor. I offered myself that first night. You remember that? I nodded. Still never asked again. I didn't take you in for that, I said. I took you in because I didn't want to let a child die on my doorstep. And me? I paused, looked at her. I didn't want to watch you freeze either. She stood slow, stepped toward me. Her fingers brushed my cheek, light and unsure. Then they dropped back to her side. I don't need your bed to feel safe, she whispered. But I want to be close to you if you'll let me. I didn't speak, just stood and stepped into her space. My hand found her jaw. My thumb traced the curve of her cheek. Then I kissed her, not because I had to, not because it was expected, but because I wanted her to know she was safe here, not just surviving, chosen. The nights were warmer now, though. I doubt it had much to do with the fire. Something in the cabin had softened. The quiet between us didn't sit like a question anymore. It wasn't holding its breath. It just was. Miriam moved through the space like she belonged to it. Not because I told her so, but because she'd earned every inch of ground with her hands, her silence, her care. I didn't think much about what that meant, not at first. I just noticed how it felt when she stood next to me, how her presence settled the room instead of changing it. One night, after Annie had drifted to sleep and the embers glowed low in the stove, Miriam stepped close to the table where I sat. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, eyes fixed somewhere between the floor and the fire. I could feel her trying to find the words. I didn't rush her. Then she said soft, I don't need your bed to feel safe. She looked at me then, her voice trembling just slightly, like she wasn't sure if she had the right to speak the truth. But I want to be close to you, she said, if you'll let me. I stood slow. I didn't speak right away. Just stepped forward close enough that I could see the way, her breath caught in her throat. My hand rose slow and steady, touched the edge of her jaw. Her skin was warm from the fire, soft beneath my callous fingers. I didn't kiss her because she needed reassurance. I kissed her because she'd become real to me. More than the woman who'd shown up in the snow, more than the survivor who patched my coat and fed my fire. She was someone I saw, full and clear, and I wanted her to know that. It wasn't a kiss of possession, wasn't even full of promise, Just one quiet moment where something unspoken passed between us and settled. She didn't cry, but I felt the way her shoulders loosened, like something inside her had finally dropped its weight for a breath. That night, we didn't undress, didn't rush. We laid together on the rug beside the fire, wrapped in one of the wool blankets, our boots near the hearth and the rest of the world pressed outside. Her back to my chest, my arm across her waist, her fingers tracing small circles against my hand. It wasn't passion that held us there. It was relief, mutual, silent relief. She whispered once, barely audible, "Thank you." I didn't answer, just held her tighter, not to claim, to confirm. The next morning came quiet, like it respected what had happened in the dark. Light filtered in through the frost-laced windows, softer than usual. The cold outside had let up just enough for the snow to start pulling back from the porch steps. I woke first. She was still beside me, her breath slow and even. I studied the way her hair fanned across the pillow, the crease between her brows almost gone. When I moved to stand, she stirred. Her eyes met mine. No shame, no regret, just tired peace. I poured water into the kettle, stoked the stove, and started the oats. She rose a few minutes later, folding the blanket we'd slept under with careful hands, then walked toward me, barefoot, and handed me a clean cloth for the counter. We didn't speak of the night before. We didn't need to. After breakfast, Annie sat by the cot, watching the steam rise from her bowl. She still hadn't said much, but she'd started humming again. I'd heard it first the day before, soft and breathy, like a memory slipping on and out of her chest. I didn't mention it to Miriam, didn't want to draw attention to something that fragile. But now, it filled the corners of the cabin like birdsong returning to a bare tree. I stepped outside to chop wood. Miriam followed, shawl around her shoulders, arms crossed against the cold. "Last night," she began, her voice trailing off. "You're safe here," I said, cutting her off gently. She nodded. "I know." We stood there for a moment, not quite touching. The air between us warm even as the wind moved around us. Then she looked up at me, her eyes clear. "I'm not used to good things staying," she said. I met her gaze. "Neither am I." That night, as the fire cracked and Annie giggled, really giggled, for the first time since arriving, I felt something in me shift. She was braiding a few strands of my hair, crooked and uneven, but I let her, sat there still, letting her fingers fumble through the motions, while Miriam watched, pretending to scold her, but smiling all the same. Later, once Annie was asleep again, Miriam and I stepped out onto the porch. The wind was calm, and for the first time in months, I could hear the trees without feeling like they were closing in. "I've been thinking," she said, "about staying." "You already are," I replied. She looked at me, eyes full of something she hadn't dared name before. "I don't want to leave, not in spring, not ever." "I didn't think you would." We didn't kiss again that night. We didn't have to. She reached for my hand. I took it. Spring didn't arrive all at once. It crept in quiet, not with fanfare, just with the sound of thawing. I heard it in the drip from the eaves, in the way the frost pulled back from the porch boards, in the creak of the trees stretching for light after too long under snow. And inside the cabin, something else began to shift, just as quiet. Miriam moved slower now, not from exhaustion, but something deeper, careful, deliberate, protective. She was carrying life again. She hadn't said the words right away, but I'd known before she did. She told me one evening by the fire, Annie was asleep, curled with her cloth doll under the patched quilt Miriam had sewn from old shirts and scrap. I was sharpening my knife, not out of need, just out of habit. She sat beside me, hands folded in her lap, and said it plain. "I think I'm with child." I stopped sharpening, set the blade down, looked at her. "You sure?" She nodded once. "Not showing yet, but I feel it." I didn't speak right off. Not because I was scared, just needed a second to catch up to how something that quiet, that real, had taken root in a place where so much had once been lost. I didn't reach for her belly or say, "Something big." I just leaned forward, pulled her close, and held her with both arms, wrapped around her like I meant it, because I did, because this wasn't the kind of thing you hold with words. It was meant to be held with presence, and I'd learned finally how to stay. That spring, the world came back different. The thaw ran deep. The soil was soft and dark beneath the last patches of snow, and the first blades of green pushed up like they'd been waiting for permission. Miriam cleared a garden plot near the fence line, her hands blistered from the shovel. I offered to do it myself, but she shook her head. "I didn't think I'd be anywhere long enough to plant," she said. "I want to do it now." So I let her. I carried the water and laid the fencing, but the earth, that was hers. Annie marked the rows with painted rocks. She used what was left of the charcoal stub and a few chips of color Miriam had saved in a tin. One rock had a crooked sun, another a heart, another had nothing but the letter A. She didn't say much while she worked, just hummed under her breath the way she always did now, especially when she was happy. I couldn't remember the last time I'd heard humming before these two showed up. Now it was as much a part of the cabin as the firewood stacked by the stove. One afternoon, I found Miriam sorting through an old trunk. Inside was a flannel blanket, a bonnet faded with time, and a wooden horse carved smooth from age. I'd made it years ago, meant for a child who never got to grow into it. I watched her fingers run over it. She didn't say anything, just held it like it had weight. That evening, she handed it to Annie. "This was someone else's once," she said gently, "but it's yours now if you want it." Annie didn't answer, she just looked at me. I gave a small nod. She hugged it to her chest and didn't let go for hours, things like that. You don't force them, you just witness them. Not long after, I built a second chair. Didn't tell anyone why, just started shaping the wood behind the barn. Took 2 days. When I brought it inside, Miriam had already cleared a place beside the stove for it. She didn't ask who it was for, just dusted it off and ran her palm along the edge like she knew it belonged. That night after dinner, we all sat in those chairs. Me, Miriam, Annie asleep between us. I looked around at the cabin, windows wiped clean, curtains made from cut flannel, a shelf now lined with jars Miriam had scrubbed spotless. It didn't look like a place of mourning anymore. It looked lived in, held together not by routine, but by choice. Later on the porch, Miriam rested her hands over her stomach. "Do you think they'll come again?" she asked. "The ones who knew me before?" "No," I said. "And if they do, they'll find I've got more to protect now." She didn't argue, just leaned against me, her head on my shoulder, and let the quiet do what it was meant to. "You've been good to me, Eli," she said. "I want you to know, I don't expect it." I looked at her. "I'm not doing it out of kindness." "Then why?" "Because I love you." She went still, like the words caught her off guard. "I didn't think I'd ever hear that again," she whispered. I reached for her hand, pulled it into mine, pressed both palms together like something sacred. "You'll never have to hear it alone." The sheriff showed up just as the first green shoots pushed through the thawed dirt. I'd been out near the stream that morning checking the traps. Boots sunk deep in mud that hadn't been there a week before. The sky was blue in patches, soft behind the pines. You'd never know the kind of winter we'd come through, not by looking, but I could still feel it in my bones. Not the cold, the memory of it, of who we were when the snow was still coming down. I saw the rider before I heard him, broad-shouldered man on a chestnut gelding, saddle worn, satchel tied behind him. I knew the shape of a man who wasn't looking for trouble but wouldn't turn away from it either. I stepped out from the porch, rifle in one hand, not raised, just resting there in case. He pulled up just short of the path. "Eli Harland?" he asked. "That's me." He dismounted slow, boots hitting the soft ground like he'd done it 1,000 times. Didn't move fast, didn't smile either. "Got word you had someone staying here," he said. "A woman and a child. Who told you that?" "Came through a passing stagecoach. Said a man named Will Palmer was asking about her," stirring up talk. I felt something in me draw tight. Will hadn't come back, but he'd still found a way to linger. "He came once," I said. "I sent him off." The sheriff looked past me towards the cabin, like he could see through the walls, like he could already tell this wasn't just about someone passing through. "You think he'll return?" I told him what had happened if he did. He nodded, jaw working side to side like he was chewing on the words. "I'm not here to make trouble," he said. "Just needed to be clear. You're not hiding anyone, are you?" "No one's hiding," I said. "They're here because I asked them to stay." That made him pause, not from disbelief, just the weight of it, the kind of sentence a man only says when he means to carry it. He nodded again. "You've always kept to yourself, Eli. Just be sure you know what you're protecting now." "I do." He left without another word, riding back the way he came, dust rising behind him in thin lines. When I stepped back into the cabin, Miriam was standing near the table, arms crossed over her middle, her face unreadable, but her eyes gave it away. She'd heard enough. "He said I should write to Coyote Ridge," she said, voice quiet. "Clear my name." "You want to?" She hesitated. "I don't care what they think of me." "I do," I said, "if it means no one else comes looking." That night, after Annie had fallen asleep beside her doll and the fire had dimmed low, Miriam sat down at the table with one of my old ledgers and a pencil. She wrote slow, every letter like it cost something to put down. I didn't read over her shoulder. She didn't offer. It wasn't a long letter, just one page. She didn't beg, didn't explain, just said she was alive, owed nothing, and was building a life where no one owned her anymore. The next day, I rode into Ash Grove and mailed it. Didn't say much to the postmaster, just handed it over and watched as he stamped it and slid it into the outgoing bin. When I got back, Miriam was outside near the fence line, sleeves rolled, hands covered in soil. She was planting beans, knees in the dirt, face flushed with the heat of labor. "You always have plans to plant?" I asked. She looked up, wiping her brow with the back of her hand. "Didn't think I'd be somewhere long enough," she said. "You are now." She reached into the seed sack, pulled out a small pouch, and placed it in my hand. "Then help me." So I did. We worked until the sun dropped low behind the ridge. No talk, no planning. Just hands in the same dirt, backs bent together, sweat shared in silence. Annie sat nearby, braiding tall grass into rings, humming her tune soft and steady. Later, after the dishes were scrubbed and the cabin had gone still, Miriam leaned against me by the porch rail, belly soft beneath my palm. The garden was just rows of soil now, nothing showing yet, but I could see it in her eyes. She believed something would grow. "You think it'll take?" she asked. I squeezed her hand. "It already has. If this story's growing on you like spring after a hard winter, if you've ever known what it means to protect something not because it's easy, but because it's yours now, like the video, tell us where you're watching from down in the comments, and follow the channel for more stories about choosing love, planting roots, and never turning back. We've got more to build, and we're not going anywhere." By late March, the last snow let go of the valley like a tired breath. Patches of green poked through the soft earth. The stream behind the barn ran clear again, and I could hear the frogs calling just after dusk. For the first time in years, spring didn't feel like a reminder of what I'd lost. It felt like something waiting for us. Something good. The garden Miriam planted started sprouting tiny green shoots reaching up like they already knew what kind of woman she was. Steady, determined. She worked that soil like she was building a life with her bare hands, which, truth be told, she was. I added poles for beans, hauled water from the stream when she got tired, but I let her lead. She needed to, and I needed to watch her do it. Inside the cabin, everything had changed, and none of it loudly. Curtains made from stitched flannel hung soft over the windows. A second chair sat by the fire, worn in already by long evenings. Annie had her own little space by the window with a table made from an old crate and a ledger full of smudged letters. Miriam was showing her how to write, slow and patient, never scolding when she got it wrong, just guiding. That child had gone from silence to song, from curling into herself to dragging kindling across the floor like she was part of everything now. And she was. Miriam moved slower these days, her belly rounding out beneath her apron. She wasn't showing big yet, but you could see it if you knew what to look for. The way her hands rested low when she stood still, the way she paused before bending, that far-off look she got sometimes, like she was already speaking to the child inside her without needing words. I'd catch her humming when she didn't realize it, the same tune Annie picked up like it had always belonged to them both. One evening, I came in from the barn, dirt on my hands, and something in my chest that felt too big to keep quiet. "I've been thinking," I said, brushing my boots at the door. Miriam looked up from the cloth she was sewing. "About what?" "Building a second room," she blinked, needle still in hand. "For what?" "For you, for the baby, for Annie. I figured I could move my cot out to the barn once the weather holds." She stood slow but sure, crossed the floor, and placed her hand gently on my chest. "You're not sleeping in the barn," she said. "You built this place. We're not moving you out to make space. We're moving over to make room for all of us." I didn't argue. I just nodded and felt something in me settle deeper. That night, we sat on the porch, sky going purple. Annie asleep in the second chair, her head leaning against Miriam's arm. I looked at them both, then at the soft shape beneath Miriam's hands. She didn't say much, just looked out toward the ridge. "You think they'll ever come again?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, like she didn't want to wake the stillness. "No," I said. "And if I'm wrong, they'll find I've got more to protect now." She turned to me, eyes searching. "And do you want to?" "Yes." "Even with me like this?" she asked. "A child already, another on the way. A past that could come knocking again." I didn't hesitate the first time. I won't now. Her eyes filled, but she blinked it away. You've been good to me, Eli. I want you to know I never expected it. I'm not doing it out of kindness. Then why? I took her hand and pulled it into my lap, covered it with both of mine. Because I love you. She stared at me like I'd broken something open, not in a bad way, just in the way someone does when they realize they don't have to run anymore. I love you too, she said. And I didn't think I'd ever get to say that again. You'll never have to say it alone. The next day I rode into Ash Grove, got supplies, boards, nails, hinges, and tucked inside my coat was a plain silver ring. I didn't make a speech. Just set it on the table when I came back and said, "If you still want to stay?" She looked at it, then at me. "You sure? I've never been more." She slipped it on, held my face in both her hands. "Then let's do this right." We didn't need a church. We didn't need guests, just stood under the pine trees, hands clasped, with Annie between us holding a sprig of sage she'd picked herself. "For luck," she said. "I'll stay," Miriam said. "I already have," I replied. And that was it. No witnesses, just truth. A woman, a child, and a man who'd thought he'd been hollowed out by loss only to learn he'd just been waiting to be filled again, with warmth, with laughter, with family. The cabin didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt lived in. It felt like home. If this story reminded you that healing isn't loud, that love can grow in quiet places, like the video, leave a comment below, tell us where you're watching from, and follow the channel for more true-hearted stories about found family, quiet courage, and the kind of love that doesn't knock, it just stays. Thank you for listening. I'm Eli Harland, and I'm not alone anymore.